Why should we stay and fight in Illinois? There's a story about George Washington that gives us a great example. In the first year of the Revolutionary War, the American army was losing battle after battle. But in the cold dead of night on Christmas Day, George Washington crossed the Delaware River, surprised the Hessians, and handed America their first victory. The next day changed the history of the country. Because before Washington could appreciate the magnitude of this victory, General Cornwallis was descending on Trenton with a much larger army. Washington understood that a victory for Cornwallis in Trenton would mean not just a loss of the battle, but for the entire war. So Washington decided that he had to go to Princeton and fight. I'm fascinated by this moment because the American army had been beaten time and time again by the British. And finally, they sneak up and they win one. But Washington had to take his cold, wet, and exhausted troops and march the very next day. As the sheer size and power of the British troops came into view, the American army literally started running away. Does that sound familiar? In Illinois, our friends, our family, our neighbors are packing up and moving. They're exhausted from the fight. Seeing his men scatter, George Washington dismounted his horse, marched his men, and headed directly towards the British army. His official biographer wrote that he never once turned his head to the left or to the right, meaning he couldn't have known if his troops were with him. Then he gave the order to fire. Smoke fills the air and George Washington disappears. Washington's biographer pulls his cap over his face because he didn't want to see the death of the nation's first leader. But when he lifted his hat back up and the smoke vanished, there was George Washington, still standing at the front of the line. His men had formed up behind him and they drove the British away. That is courage. Because the reason he was willing to endure death, to endure treason, was because he was fighting for the truth that all men have unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was fighting for the truth. A truth with an uppercase T. The same truth that Abraham Lincoln fought for during the Civil War. The same truth that Martin Luther King fought for during the Civil Rights Movement. I draw a distinction between an uppercase truth, meaning the perfect aim of what's right. A lowercase truth means a fact or a belief that's accepted as right. In other words, it's subjective. Think about that for a minute. If we don't have a perfect truth, is there any truth at all? And if truth ceases to exist, then who controls the lowercase truth? Nearly 20 years ago, the Illinois Policy Institute was built to fight for truth. The truth that the free market is the greatest force for good in the history of the world. The truth that in the last 50 years, 2 billion people have been lifted up out of poverty, an achievement that has never happened before in human existence. We are defenders of that truth, and we march and we fight because we know that human flourishing happens when people are given dignity and opportunities, particularly in work. It feels like our culture is running away from that truth, not knowing what to believe. This is our moment to dismount our horses, to march directly into the fray and to fight. This is our moment for courage. And this is why we stay and fight.